Hello, I'm Bud McCord. I'm here in South America, Brazil, South America, that is. Welcome to Food for Thought, Thinking with Jesus. It's the second day of December 2021. We are walking in the words of the Apostle John in John's Gospel. We have been able to see Jesus, hear Jesus, learn to love Jesus as we've walked in these pages. It's the same process in the life of every single Christian. I hope you're well and ready to begin to listen to some more of the words of Jesus. I want you to hold on to a thought as I read, and then it'll make sense toward the end. A very well-known, famous clinical psychologist said this: "He who has the best story wins." He who has the best story wins. Hang on to that thought. I'll come back to that because we're right in the middle of the best story that's ever been told. But now we're at a part of the story where something dramatic is happening, and we're in John chapter 16, beginning in verse 1. "These things I have spoken to you," this is Jesus speaking, "that you should not be made to stumble. They will put you out of the synagogues. Yes, the time is coming that whoever kills you will think that he offers God service. And these things they will do to you because they have not known the Father nor me. But these things I have told you, that when the time comes, you may remember that I told you of them. And these things I did not say to you at the beginning because I was with you." Hang on to that. I didn't tell you in the beginning about this because I was with you. "But now that I go away to him who sent me, and none of you ask me, 'Where are you going?' But because I have said these things to you, sorrow has filled your heart. Nevertheless, I tell you the truth, it is to your advantage that I go away. For if I do not go away, the Helper will not come to you, but if I depart, I will send him to you. And when he has come, he will convict the world of sin and of righteousness and of judgment, of sin because they do not believe in me, of righteousness because I go to my Father and you see me no more, of judgment because the ruler of this world is judged." He who has the best story wins. The psychologist who said this was pointing to the fact that we live in our own story. Every human being lives in a series of stories. And we have to coordinate these stories. And so whoever has the best story wins. Well, Jesus had the best story. The Bible opens with the story of God clearly told to our first parents, Adam and Eve. They awakened in a paradise that God had created, and God's presence walked with them every day. They were in the greatest story. They were in the right story. We know in the scriptures that they left the right story and went to the wrong story, the story of right and wrong and human beings trying to be their own God. And the Bible is the story of how God pursues humanity to bring them back into the right story, the best story. Now, when Jesus begins to call his disciples, he calls them to walk with him in his story. Now, he knows his story. He knows from where he came. He knows what his relationship is to his Father. He knows who the Spirit of God is. He is God in the flesh, and he is in that original story, but he calls his disciples, and he literally lets them walk in his story. And what we're hearing here is he's still walking them into his story, but his story needs to be more than just something that they have observed and heard about and even come to love. That story needs to go inside of them. There is a difference between walking in a story and the story being in you and being your story. This is why later on the Apostle Paul would say, "It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me." The Christian story is the story of Jesus. And that story we can see, we can hear, we can even love it, but it has to be in us for it to move out into human history. And then we invite other people to see him, to hear him, to love him, and to live him. And that's the discipleship process. Let me kind of put it in a different way. I live in a city here in Brazil, which is hundreds of years old. And this city, if you came to today, it's about 800,000 people. It's a very modern city. It's one of the best cities in Brazil where you could live. And I often walk in a park, which is about a mile from where I live. And it's a park, and it has a particular name. It's named after a woman who cared for the sick. Because the history of this city is, it was a city dedicated to taking care of people with tuberculosis. Right now, you would never know this had been a sick city. You would not know unless you walk here. But there are still people alive in this city who tell me the stories of how that no one wanted to come to this city because they were so afraid they would catch tuberculosis. Now that we have drugs that stop tuberculosis, the place where I walk is a former hospital. We have a retreat center up in the mountains of Brazil for the Abide Ministries where we do training for leaders. And it too is a former hospital for tuberculosis patients. And they would go to this place where we now have our retreats, and they would spend 4 years being cured by the cold air of the mountains, coming into their room every night to finally kill the sickness. 4 years. Every time I walk onto that property, and now that we're caring for the souls and hearts and minds of people, we know that the only cure for them is a new story. When I was a young Christian at First Baptist Church of West Hollywood many, many years ago, when I accepted Jesus as my Savior, the church services would often begin with a hymn called Blessed Assurance, Jesus is mine. And it had a verse to it that said, "This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long." That echoes in my mind because Christianity is the original story, recaptured, reset, and put into us. Now let me kind of another illustration. What is the difference between a truly real disciple and someone who just goes to church or maybe admires Christianity, or they're glad they got a ticket to heaven? That's all it is for them. The difference is Christianity outside or Christianity inside. There's a story told of an evangelist in India, an Indian evangelist, a convert Christian who became an evangelist. He was next to a river, and a young student was with him, and he said, "Why is it that the Western nations, European, United States, South America, why is it they say they're Christians, but they don't behave like Christians?" And the teacher, he said to the young learner, the young disciple, he said, "Go down into the river and find a rock on the bottom of the river and bring it out here to me." And so he waded into the water. He found one of those rounded rocks that's been in the river for a long, long time because the river there has covered it and shaped it. And he brought it out and he put it before his teacher. And his preacher said, "Now I want you to find another rock, and I want you to break open the rock that you brought out of the river." And so he found another rock, and then he let fall on top of that hard rock, the rock he had pulled out of the river, and it broke in half. And he said, "Now look on the inside." He says, "Is it wet or dry inside?" He said, "It's dry." He says, "That's what happens when Christianity only flows around us, but does not flow in us. This transition that Jesus is making here in John chapter 16 is Christianity is about to go inside. Jesus said, I didn't tell you about all of this because I was with you. Christianity was outside. It was Jesus, and he was there. And he could be there for a small group, but he can't be there for everybody. So he has to go out back to the Father and send this story, this life of Jesus, and it has to pass through us. That's why we're branches. It has to be connected to us and pass through us. That's why he says, if you believe in me, out of your innermost being will flow rivers of living water. The difference between a true disciple and a learner who is not yet totally committed to the Christian faith is it hasn't begun to flow in them and through them. I could live here in the city my whole life and never know that it was once a very sick city. And it was also a city of great healers and doctors and nurses that risked their lives. And I could walk around that park for months and months and months, and if I didn't read the stories that are on the walls there, it's a monument to the love of these people, I would have never known it. Well, that's what it's like in countries of the West, like the United States or in Europe. Christianity's still all around, but that's not what makes it work. It has to get inside. It has to get inside. And that's what Jesus said. I'm going away so this can go in you. Christ in you, the hope of glory. When you understand the difference between being in a Christian nation, what you're saying is, I'm surrounded by the history of Christianity. But the only kind of Christianity that actually works is not kept in a nation. It's kept in each disciple. And it only works when it's flowing through you, not just around you. Think on that. I've enjoyed thinking on that a lot. It's concerning to me that we transform Christianity into something outside, when in reality, Christianity is Christ in us, the hope of glory. Hey, have a great day. It's great talking to you. Lord willing, I'll see you tomorrow morning.